Hello, I'm Rob, and welcome to Series 3 of Directors Uncut, or the podcast formerly known as Directors Uncut, now known as the Uncut Network. But every month we rotate between directors, actors, and super specific genres, thanks to one of the co-hosts we've got on today. We cover everything from exploitation to things your parents will absolutely approve of, relative unknowns to household names, and everything in between. Uncut Network is the movie podcast of all the niches, and they cover all those things and more. I am joined by Graham. Hello there.
Hello.
And Robyn. Hello there. First time on the podcast proper.
The first time on this podcast, of course. I'm so sorry for what you're about to experience.
Yeah, just to sort of peer behind the curtain, the podcast is changing. It was Directors Uncut, so how it works now, we've got 1 month is Directors Uncut. The next month is sort of fan favourite Cult Actors Uncut. That's not really what we're calling it, we're just calling it Actors because that's a lot of words to call it. And I don't think it'll last. And the last one is Genres Uncut, which kind of goes a bit off-paced, I guess we'll call it in the generous terms.
Normal movies uncut.
Yeah. And what I am looking forward to, I don't know whether it's going to come anytime soon, because, you know, we just see how it goes, is sort of the not satanic panic so much, just, I guess just panic movies from America. That was fun, and
Oh yeah.
like
that stuff.
Scare movies, yes.
Yeah, the Red Scare, the everything that's not a white, normal, straight guy scare.
Yes.
I mean, recently on the Geek Show, I went through the abject nightmare that was the From Hollywood to Heaven box set, which I got through, like, I just, like, one disc. One disc is all you get in a review, because just, I have seen things which cannot be unseen.
Yeah, wasn't that a director who was he did a lot of exploitation movies, nearly died, and then he became a born-again Christian and did... made these, like, nightmarishly sadistic films. Like,
genuinely, like, grindhouse for God, isn't it? The Ron Orman.
Yeah, there's stuff in there, as I have said before. There are things said by the pastor Estes W. Perkle in it, which they are so nightmarishly just evil. They put the Marquis de Sade to shame. It's how does your average American pastor just think of this?
Well, seeing what they are now with those evangelical people and what things are going to send you to hell and how awful they all are, I'm not surprised. I'm not going to try and make a segue out of that, but the director we've got today is James Whale. But before we talk about him and his work in the two movies that we've picked, in the past I'd usually talk about how we come to know this director, but I think I'm changing it a bit this season, on season 3.
Okay.
So, that era of film, let's talk about that. Sort of 1930s, sort of pre-50s, sort of horror feelings.
Absolutely.
In that era of stuff.
That's interesting, that, because it's probably like the era of film that I have least knowledge of. I think there's kind of a hole in my appreciation where you have the late silent films, and they're obviously fabulous and experimental, and, you know, a lot of them still stand up as some of my favourite films to this day. And then towards the end of the 30s, you start to get film noir coming in. Love it. Big fan of that. Some of the sort of first stuff that really taught me film appreciation and how to read a film was film noir. And then in between, there's just this sort of hole, isn't there? And there are isolated things I enjoy. You know, John Ford's doing good stuff around this time. I'm a big Marx Brothers fan. But there's nothing that really screams this is what the 1930s were all about, in the same way that it's very easy to pick out films that are quintessentially 70s or quintessentially 50s or 90s or whatever. 30s is a bit of a hole in my knowledge, but I do like James Whale, as we will discover.
Robyn?
I mean, it's no secret now. I'm a big fan of this specific kind of era of kind of trying to get to grips with screen sound horror, and kind of like some of the pre-code stuff, the postcode stuff and the nightmare that came of that, it's an era I'm absolutely fascinated with, and the performers that came out of it, and just there's something about it. I think I've got a really big soft spot for theatrical horror, kind of stuff with an overtly stylized look, this over-top gothic graveyards with too much fog in them. I love it. It's something I really, really love. This kind of early screen attempts to create the atmosphere of these classic horror novels, and creating this really weird, specific aesthetic out of them, with the painted backgrounds and the soundstage graveyards. It's basically, I'm just rambling here and repeating myself.
Oh, no, it's glorious what they do.
Yeah, completely.
There's just something to it, and it's also fascinating how in the early 30s, on the one hand, they don't really have this whole sound cinema thing figured out yet. So occasionally you'll just have horror films from that period, which are people basically standing around in a room for over an hour, just talking at each other with no music. I am specifically talking about Dracula, which is a film I do like, but at other times, this is no hate towards anything. It's also just pre the Hays Code, and people are trying to figure out what levels of shock value can we bring to screen. So for a period of about 3 years at the start of the 1930s, you slowly see horror films which push more and more the boundary of what is acceptable, to the point that suddenly there's a drop-off. It's almost as if when the teacher's out of the classroom and everybody's like fucking about in the room, and they come back and say, all right, shut up. No, you've pushed it too far. We're going to make you stop for like 20 years.
They really did, though. I mean, Eureka have done some great box sets. There was one that I did that it was like the movie that they did that tried to get every rule that they could bend. It's like basically Gozu for the Hays Code. And if you don't know Gozu, it's basically Takashi Miike.
Oh, I know Gozu.
Let's break all the taboos.
I know Gozu. There is no unknowing it.
Yeah. But that movie, I think it was. I always get the names. The names are always so similar, but it's the Black Cat, I think.
I think it's the Black Cat, the one where Boris Karloff gets skinned alive by Bela Lugosi, because that is not particularly something you forget. I'd say about a film I have not seen. It's my big blind spot.
Instantly became a favourite. I mean, those box sets that Eureka put out, if you're interested in this sort of era of cinema, I would say they're very hit and miss, these movies, but when they hit, your socks are off.
Superb stuff. Stuff. I think James Whale in particular. But it's quite funny because you look at James Whale's filmography, and he made a lot of films. He made a whole handful of films. He only ever made 4 horror films, but he basically had a string of 4 horror hits in a row, which are considered to be some of the greatest of all time, and then he just stopped doing them. And you're thinking, you never really see that happen. Just director instantly goes into horror, drops 4 masterpieces, and then just says, I'm not doing it anymore. Never again.
While you're on top. Yeah. But it's funny, Robyn, that you should bring up the Hays Code, because this could be a segue, Rob. I could be handing you a segue here, but the 2 films that we are going to talk about today were made on either side of the Hays Code being instituted, and in a lot of ways it is the post-Hays Code one that is the more transgressive and the more subversive.
That will be something very, very interesting to look at. I think The Old Dark House and The Bride of Frankenstein probably spoiled what the titles are for this, even though probably already know. They are kind of interesting sides of the same coin. I think they're quite interesting, and I also think they're quite representative of what James Whale was doing in terms of horror. Also, I'm going to take. Now that the focus is on me, this is actually a podcast about Showboat. Welcome to Showboat Uncut. Welcome to Showboat Uncut. We're doing this. You shouldn't have let me on this podcast because it's going to be 5 episodes of Showboat.
We did taunt Rob with the possibility that, James Wales directed musicals. Rob.
He did a musical.
Yeah, that era of musicals as well. Oh no.
It's it just
I think I've got to clarify my distaste of musicals.
Mm.
Because why the music in musicals it doesn't tend to be music that I like. So why would I watch a musical that's full of a style of music that kind of annoys me? It's just choosing to watch a movie that I know is going to annoy me. It's kind of yeah.
I did actually watch Showboat as research for this podcast. I actually went and watched it, and like any good 30s film, it's pretty serviceable. It's a pretty serviceable film all around, apart from the abhorrent racism. But that tends to happen with your 30s films, pretty good, apart from when it gets suddenly really badly racist.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like what is it? Island of Lost Souls, great movie. Ooh, bit racist. But it is what it is.
Well, I'd better change my wet things.
They were all godless here. They used to bring their women here, brazen, lolling creatures in silks and satins. They filled the house with laughter and sin, laughter and sin. And if I ever went down among them, my own father and brothers, they would tell me to go away and pray. They wouldn't tell Rachel to go away and pray. And I prayed and left them with their lustful red and white women. My father's still alive. He's upstairs. He's very old.
Oh, is he?
He's 102.
That's very old, isn't it?
He's a wicked, blasphemous old man. You're wicked too. Young and handsome, silly and wicked. You think of nothing but your long, straight legs and your white body and how to please your man. You revel in the joys of fleshly love, don't you? That's fine stuff, but it'll rot. That's finer stuff still, but it'll rot too in time.
Don't! How dare you!
And it's one of those stories which unfolds more or less as you would expect. There is a secret in the attic. There are other people who get stranded and come in when the plot's in danger of flagging. But for all its stage adaptation, it is not about the plot. For me, this is about James Whale's sense of humour more than anything.
Yes. But before you get into that, do you want to mention a few details?
Sure.
The one thing that really threw me is the detail of the going to Shrewsbury. It's the only time that I can ever remember a movie ever mentioning going to Shrewsbury as where they're meant to go, but they couldn't. They were waylaid by apocalyptic rain, which is just a funny little detail.
I had rewatched. I actually watched the film beforehand because I watched it in preparation in very early 2020 for a segment I was providing for the Queer for Fear documentary on Shudder, which never ended up in it. There were about 2 hours of footage of me, and it never ended up in it because the production was a mess and completely collapsed. But I did watch it, and I rewatching it because I remembered loving it. I had forgotten just how funny it is. The amount of times it made me laugh, and even more, I had forgotten the fact that it contains one of my favorite characters in anything ever, who is introduced as soon as they enter the house, and possibly the best character in any film is Horace Femme, who is played by Ernest Thesiger, who is also in Bride of Frankenstein as a very similarly funny character.
Yeah.
And he is delightful. He is a proper old queen and a character, and he is just ridiculously charmingly silly. And I love that he loves gin, as does every character in every James Whale movie, because it's a theme. Watching these back to back, I had forgotten the fact that there's gin verbally referenced in every James Whale film, no matter how obscure.
Really?
I think
Yeah.
James Whale just liked gin, but most of the time it's Ernest Thesiger saying it, so it might be him. And there's also, it's just like, he's great. He loves potatoes. He loves gin. He doesn't love going upstairs. He's great.
Yes. Yeah, he's fantastic.
You were a big actor in this before that, though. Just Charles Lawton. I just want to mention that.
Oh, Charles Lawton. Oh, yeah.
I love Charles Lawton, but it was kind of one of these moments where I thought, is he putting on an accent? And then I did a bit of
accent.
He's from Scarborough, which kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Yes,
Charles
absolutely.
Lawton, one of the greatest actors who's ever lived, is from Scarborough.
Yes.
I can't square that circle.
Like, if you could somehow colorize this film and not have it look awful, which is something that colorization can never actually achieve, you could show Charles Lawton's character to a modern day audience. They would just go, "Oh, it's Peter Kay." It's like
He definitely gave off that vibe. I thought you were going to say if they colorized it, he'd just be red.
Yeah, he probably would.
The amount of alcohol that goes into his system throughout the course of that.
Yeah.
He loves potato and roast beef. I mean,
yeah, he does.
Solid English diet.
Yeah.
Love me potatoes, love me roast beef. Ate me woman companion who definitely isn't a sex worker.
They skirted around that, didn't they?
Yeah, but they didn't really skirt around it.
Oh, yeah.
Let's be honest.
It's they implied it heavily. I think they say she's a dancing girl.
A chorus girl, which has definite connotations, particularly for the 1930s.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the value of this film really is, if you were trying to get someone into James Whale, in many ways it's the best film to show them, because when you're dealing with very old films that are heavily ironic, as his films often are, there is a sort of barrier when people watch them, they may think, oh, well, is this actually an ingenious genre parody, or is it just a bit cheesy and old? But I can imagine someone watching Bride of Frankenstein and not being able to make that decision if they're not familiar with James Whale's work. But you cannot watch The Old Dark House and not recognise that James Whale is an incredibly funny guy who means all of this stuff.
It's
both of them, really, yeah.
It's quite a delightful genre parody and quite inspired in the sense that the concept is it's your typical horror setup. There's, of course, The Old Dark House in the title, which is very on the nose. And we've got the typical setup, and they turn up at the house with the monster and everything, except there is no monster. The monster is a drunk man, and the entire horror of the film, to the point that I've seen some people not consider it horror. They're wrong. The entire horror of the film is that they're in a house with a family who there's nothing supernatural about them. They just don't like each other. And it's just the horror of being stuck in a house in Wales during a storm with a family who won't stop talking shit about each other. And it's great. It's great. It's delightful.
I mean, this era of horror is hard to talk about without using the term gothic. And gothic is a term that really fascinates me, because nowadays it's used exclusively to mean horror, but back in the day, you could have a gothic adventure story, you could have a gothic romance. It kind of transcends genre boundaries that way. You've got elements of Jane Eyre in this movie with the pyromaniac son, is very kind of akin to the first Mrs. Rochester in his role in the story.
he's also a character you need to talk about as far as not really a gay subtext.
Yes,
Because
he is.
he's not hiding that either, really. Because throughout the whole thing, there's this thing about, well, not the whole thing, towards the end there, the reveal that there's another son, there's Saul. We've locked him in the attic because he's really, really dangerous, not like the other children. The other one who's just the daughter, who we've not mentioned yet, is the older of the two that's like public. And she's very selectively deaf, which is also very funny.
What?
She's deaf when it suits her, and she's very funny when it's not. And Saul is in the attic, and they employ Karloff, or Boris Karloff, to sort of look after him and make sure he doesn't escape. He's mute, which I think just on that, I think Boris Karloff was a great actor. And I think when you look at him as this sort of reductive character, the mute, the person who is monosyllabic, you don't realise how good he is. But that's a conversation for later, I feel. But Saul, the guy who's locked in the attic, is this tiny little man who laughs like, I don't know how to describe what that laugh is. But it's the campest thing I've ever heard in laugh forms. And I think, going into spoilers, it blatantly and doesn't even try to suggest that Karloff's character and Saul are lovers. It's not even trying to hide it or disguise it.
Almost no mention of it online anywhere in discussions, and there is a moment where I'm thinking, okay, so what are people interpreting this as? Because at the end, he picks him up in his arms and shows the first emotion that Karloff's character showed throughout the entire film, as he's genuinely sad, and carries this man, out of the house. And I'm just like, there are things unsaid in this scene, which I'm just thinking, sorry, what is this meant to be interpreted as other than them being lovers?
Absolutely.
It's just mute weirdos being friends. I don't see anything gay about that at all.
Soul Femme is not mute. Soul Femme will not shut up.
He's not subtle about it. Nobody's subtle in this about it. I wouldn't be surprised. You know, the whole family has the ways, but
it's true. Even the sister aforementioned, she's very, very repressed, but it's notable that there is a scene where she says, "Oh, members of our family die if they act out. They brought all their laughter and sin into the house, and I won't stand for it." And then immediately starts trying to touch up the other woman in the room.
What's that thing? She says, "I bet you enjoy pleasures of the flesh, don't you?" And she's sort of trying to lay her palms on her and hand it. It's like, you're not hiding it very well there.
Part of the joys of it being pre-code as well. Like, it's quite upfront about the sexual content which is described in it. I was quite impressed and surprised by it first time around, just how frank it is.
Well, of course, at the top of the pyramid, this is kind of a spoiler, I guess, but at the top of the pyramid, the thing that's building up is a drag role, isn't it? It's Elspeth Dudgeon as Sir Roderick Femme, the ancient patriarch of the family.
Roderick Femme is a character that fascinates me on so many levels. Again, it's another thing where I'm not sure what the choice made was.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, this was the 30s. I know that James Whale was gay. I don't want to just interpret everything under that lens, because it might not have been intended. And it was the 30s. It's basically, in our ideas of understanding kind of transgender identity in the West, basically, other than like Weimar era Germany, there wasn't much like common knowledge.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting because the actress, I've forgotten what she's called. I'm a terrible fan of this film.
Elspeth Dudgeon.
Yes, is credited under a male name and plays this male character, and it is never really questioned at all. And the way that Roderick Femme is spoken of disapprovingly, even by other members of the family, it makes me wonder, is this one of the first transgender characters in horror? Before that was even really a thing. I will claim Roderick as that, but I think he's just a fascinating character overall.
In filmic horror. Yes, I'd say definitely
In film, of course.
on cinema. But as far as characters playing men playing women and women playing men, that goes back
that's
centuries. That
ages on the stage.
China and Japan,
Yeah,
huge
definitely.
history of doing it. It was
90%
normal,
of
absolutely
all
normal.
Shakespeare comedies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not like right-wing Twitter says, it wasn't invented by, I don't know, wokeism or something. It goes back centuries, this stuff.
Can't believe woke James Whale made.
That is a thing, though, actually. I do
If
want
I
to bring
made it
that up.
today, it would be called the Old Woke House.
That was terrible, that, though, because looking it up, and the first James Whale you find on Google is the radio presenter who works on Talk TV, which for internationalists is sort of like a right-wing news outlet, which is really weird when you think the James Whale that we're talking about is very much not that. It's surreal, very surreal.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I just think it's an incredibly funny film. It's definitely the all of Wales horror films are funny on some level, but this is the one that moves most comprehensively towards farce. At the time I discovered it, maybe it's just because, I discovered it, and when you discover a film, you feel like nothing's ever been written about it before sometimes, but it definitely felt like when I was growing up, this was less focused upon than the two Frankenstein films or The Invisible Man, but it is getting a lot more recognition now, and I couldn't be happier for it because I think it's a blast.
That is, admittedly, because for about 30 years, the film was lost.
Was it?
Yes, it was. It wasn't a big success upon release, and then it practically vanished. It wasn't reshown until William Castle, who made House on Haunted Hill and so forth, got the rights to make a remake for Hammer. And you might think, wow, William Castle makes a remake for Hammer of the old Dark House. That's going to be delightful. Wrong. It's absolute arse cheeks. I watched it in preparation for this podcast, and it is the most profoundly unfunny film ever. Okay, it's not the worst film ever, but it has a lack of any wit to it. There's a gag with a gun falling out of a cabinet and shooting someone, which is quite funny, but that's literally the only moment. But the best part of that is actually that it led to the old Dark House being rediscovered in a vault somewhere and put back on the drive-in circuit. So it brought us back the old Dark House. Which I think is very cool.
Yeah, I imagine it'd do quite well, because just thinking about it, there's loads of films from the sort of B-movie drive-in days that are like this. I mean, Spider Baby, for one, that and Spider Baby.
Definitely.
Beautifully. Subtext and text so alike. But that's the thing that this movie doesn't get enough credit for, I think. It's just also, there's the trope, car breaks down in the middle of the storm, and there's an old dark house. It's as old as time, but a lot of them draw from this movie, essentially, and a few others, but things don't become tropes by accident, I guess. And
they stick, don't they? Yeah.
It's quite funny if you're more familiar with the Rocky Horror Picture Show before watching this, because you watch it, you have all of your expectations, and it's actually this group of flirtatious, rambunctious people turning up at a house full of prudes. So it's kind of a reverse.
That's true. Wow. Yeah.
That's a revelation, the remake of the old Dark House's Rocky Horror. So there you go, you've got it.
Kind of is. Also, Carry On Screaming might as well be.
Oh, yeah, Carry On Scream. That's the best horror, the best Carry On movie by an absolute mile.
I mean, Kenneth Williams in that is essentially playing Ernest Thesiger in everything.
Yeah.
Although I think Kenneth Williams was just a bit like that.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But it feels like a very appropriate franchise to carry the torch, right? I'm just looking some of this up, actually. And
carry the torch on, if you will. Ha ha! You walked into it.
I did. I left the door open, and Boris Karloff creaked it slowly open and said something indecipherable. But yeah, it was. I just realised I had.
No, not indecipherable. It's not undecipherable. It's not Welsh, Graham.
Yeah, even Welsh would sound like that.
I love how he appears to be dubbed over by himself. It appears that the weird noises that he makes were all dubbed over in post. I don't know if that's Karloff's voice. I think it's Karloff's voice. But it's a very odd thing to dub in.
Yes.
It just makes me think of Toast of London and his scenes of dubbing things in there. Very, very funny.
Oh man, what I would give to hear Boris Karloff say, "I can hear you, Clem Fandango."
What I would give to see Matt Berry play Morgan in a version of The Old Dark House.
Wow. Yes. I mean, I'd happily not Matt Berry do anything, but that would be great.
Does this have a life on stage? Because it feels like it's so now, really, that it should.
I know it's based on a novel by J.B. Priestley,
Yes.
of An Inspector Calls fame, but I don't know if it's been adapted to the stage. It probably has been adapted to the stage. I know that Karloff essentially played on the effects of this in yet another haunted house spoof, which is Arsenic and Old Lace, which he did on stage, which almost like riffs on this, in which he plays a character surgically modified to look like Boris Karloff, which is quite funny because they wanted him for the film and they couldn't get him because he was on stage for the production, so they had to make up someone to look like Boris Karloff.
And people think meta's a recent thing.
Oh no.
No. So, I don't know if there's anything else to really mention about The Old Dark House, but is anything that's burning a hole in either of your pockets that you
Have a potato.
Yes. But the potato is burning a hole in my pocket.
Potato is definitely burning a hole in my pocket.
Yeah. One thing I do want to mention, though, on that, is one character we haven't mentioned. I can't remember his name. There's the married couple and there's the guy in the back seat of the car.
Pendrell. Yes,
Pendrell,
he was
yes.
mentioned.
He's an interesting character, I think, because it just shows how the standards of the time has, or what constitutes different types of characters would change over time. I mean, because he mentioned
the right behind my house. What's going on here?
throughout the movie, one scene in particular, he's mentioned that you're not really from this time. The feminine intuition that they talk about in one scene, they point out that he's not really of this time. He belongs somewhere else. And if his character was anywhere else, he would be the gay character in the movie. His traits are of the gay character. That's how gay characters are sort of archetyped. And in this, he's supposed to be sort of, I don't know whether it's called the macho character, but kinda.
I think he's interesting.
Girl.
I think he's the funny, silly character who turns up and won't stop doing a bit. He just turns up and starts singing at people, which is great because Charles Lawton shows up and starts singing at people, and they're just like, yes, finally, someone who gets me. Also, it seems hilariously, there's a time skip at one point in the film where it fades into later in the night, like about an hour later, and hilariously, now every single character is acquainted with each other and basically knows each other's life story, and will just randomly say very honest things to each other. And it just happens, and I think it's an incredibly funny detail that almost nothing else does.
Yes.
It just skips the character development in a very funny way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's... I can't think of anything more to say about it, but it is a wonderful film.
It is delightful, yeah. And if you want to get into sort of 1930s, saying it's horror, I think writes some checks that I think people might not buy into. Because when people think horror, they think it has to be scary, it has to have some sort of real threat, either existential or
But brute man Boris Karloff busts through a door after basically having downed like a whole thing of scotch. He's not a monster. He's just really plastered. That's just the entire joke of his character, and I love it.
Yeah. It's a wonderful movie. Check it out if you haven't. It's really, really... And I think there's also a Blu-ray of that as well from Eureka. So
There is a Blu-ray from Eureka. I don't know if it's still in print. If it's not, then they should repress it because more people need to see The Old Dark House. It's great.
Thanks.
What can I get you?
I'm not sure. For relaxing times, make it Suntory
time.
I'll have a vodka tonic. Thanks. So what are you doing here?
A couple of things. Taking a break from my wife, forgetting my son's birthday, and getting paid $2 million to endorse a whiskey when I could be doing a play somewhere.
Oh.
But the good news is the whiskey works. What are you doing?
My husband's a photographer, so he's here working, and I wasn't doing anything, so I came along, and we have some friends that live here.
How long have you been married?
Oh, thank you. 2 years.
25 long ones.
You're probably just having a midlife crisis. Did you buy a Porsche yet?
You know, I was thinking about buying a Porsche.
In 25 years. It's impressive.
Well, you figure you sleep 1/3 of your life. That knocks off 8 years of marriage right there. So you're down to 16 and change, and you're just a teenager at marriage. You can drive it, but there's still the occasional accident.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I'm not sure yet, actually. I just graduated last spring.
What did you study?
Philosophy.
Yeah, there's a good buck in that racket.
Yeah. Well, so far it's pro bono.
Well, I'm sure you'll figure out the angles.
Yeah. I hope your Porsche works out. Cheers to that, huh?
Cheers to that. Kampai.
So, we come to the part of the show where we pick who we're going to be doing in an upcoming episode, and as I've already alluded, we don't do it by random anymore because it's just not fair, in essence. So, in an upcoming episode, we are going to be doing Sofia Coppola. Sophie is the unknown Coppola I've heard about. Sofia is the director, the daughter of Francis Ford. There's a relationship there, Nicolas Cage. I don't know, that family is messy, but
it's an elaborate family tree. I think Cage is a cousin of the family. Maybe wrong.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, there's definitely a link, isn't there?
Yeah, Sofia Coppola is one of these really odd directors who flirts with being sort of the voice of a generation and being unable to make decent movies at all. She sort of like flips. Because she, at a peak, she's like the best of her generation, and then she goes completely into becomes anonymous.
Well good. That's what you're trying to get at. I was wondering.
Anonymity is a tongue twister. But yes, she, at her best, she's absolutely outstanding. But is there any of her filmography that stands out for the two of you?
I mean, for me, it's got to be The Virgin Suicides, and I always hate being that guy who's like, the first thing was the best and it was all downhill from there, but I do think The Virgin Suicides is pretty close to perfect. I haven't really kept up with some of the later stuff. I was really turned off when I saw Marie Antoinette, but I wouldn't mind watching that again, because I think the film might have aged better than my objections to it would have.
Yeah. I mean, the movies like that are always kind of they do pop up quite often.
Yes.
Movies of their time, people think they're awful, give them 10 years, all-time classic.
Yes, absolutely. And I think looking certainly at some of my Letterboxd friends' reaction to Marie Antoinette makes me think I might be the sort of Mr. Jones on that one. I might be the one who just missed the point when that first came out.
Maybe not. Who knows? We'll find out. Gav, anything?
I'm trying to think. Lost in Translation was hers, wasn't it?
That was the thing that put her on the sort of the global stage, really. That was a
Big
huge
one, yeah.
success.
I always liked that one, but that's obviously is Bill Murray, so you wouldn't like it, would you?
Yeah, we'll have that conversation. If people wanted to do that one, at the very least, but yeah.
It's an interesting film, if nothing else, Lost in Translation. It's very long and has points where you just think, you need to finish now, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's a romantic comedy, and it was that sort of brief pocket in sort of the 90s and noughties when romantic comedies were experimenting with these decent movies, because they go through these phases. Like 60s had classic ones, 70s had classic ones, 80s, 90s, and then just nope.
Yes, this was the one actual effect of the Millennium Bug, wasn't it? That whatever part of Hollywood's writing software dealt with quality romantic comedies just tanked.
Yeah, and Lost in Translation is, I think, one of the last before that sort of horrible cut-off.
Probably, yeah.
Basically, yeah. I mean, maybe Punch Drunk Love after that, but that romantic comedy is a little bit of a...
It's pushing the genre pretty far out, isn't it? Yeah.
But she's an interesting director, and I hope I don't have to talk about Lost in Translation, so I don't have to explain my disdain for Bill Murray and the smug... No, not now.
You've done too with Bill Murray, you know. You could avoid Lost in Translation and end up doing On the Rocks instead.
Oh, that would be such a tease, wouldn't it?
And now for our lesson. Remember, this is bread. 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 And this is wine. To drink. 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 Good. Good. We are friends, you and I. Friends. Good. Good. And now for a smoke. No. This is good. Smoke. You try. Oh. Good. 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 Before you came, I was all alone. It is bad to be alone. Alone. Bad. Friend. Good. Friend. Good. Now come here. And what is this? This is wood for the fire. Wood. And this is fire. No. Fire is good. Fire, no good. No. There is good, and there is bad. Good. Bad. Good. Music.
And that leads us to the second movie of the day, which is legendary horror, Bride of Frankenstein. So, Robin, you want to take a spin at the synopsis for that fella?
I will. So, for the record, it follows on directly from James Whale's Frankenstein. You know, for those of you who don't know how Frankenstein ends, Colin Clive dies at the end of Frankenstein. Only he doesn't, because he's brought back for Bride of Frankenstein and survived everything. It's all a bit dubious, but who cares? Literally, who cares? Colin Clive's Dr. Frankenstein is bedridden on his very, very joyous wedding night, where he totally didn't almost die after being attacked by a mob of angry villagers. Anyway, whilst in bed, he is awoken by Dr. Pretorius, whose name is said 10 times. In his introduction, he is a character who has never been heard of before in anything. He's played by Ernest Thesiger, and he from The Old Dark House, and he turns up and says, come on, you gotta get back in the lab instantly. I don't care if you've got a broken spine, get back in the lab. We need to make another monster, and this time we need to make a woman monster. And somewhere along the way, Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster, who goes on this beautiful soul-searching journey through the woods, is found by Thesiger and is used as means of guilt-tripping Frankenstein to making another monster. It's wacky adventures.
Oh,
Yes.
no, it's beyond wacky. It has my favourite ever. Here's a little bit that we're going to start with that sets up the story. We're going to frame it that way, where it's got like this very high society just gathering of the campest posh person that's ever existed. And the woman who's meant to be, forget her name now.
Mary Shelley.
Yeah.
Speaking of campest posh person ever, that is meant to be Lord Byron, the man who the word bisexual was invented because of. Trust me, camp fits the man.
Yeah, because he really is. And not just that, there's another character that I have to draw attention to because it's so secondary. I don't know who she's called, but there's an actor in this who is
talking about Minnie. We're talking about Minnie, played by Una O'Connor, who is in another James Whale film. She basically plays the exact same character in The Invisible Man, which she is in even less. Same character, same stupid scream. She is lovable. She is riotously funny. I don't know how the performance that she does end up like that, but it is perfect.
Because what she does, basically, she turns up and she's just wildly sarcastic to everybody. That's her character.
Yeah, she's wildly sarcastic, and when she starts to absolutely lose her shit at every single thing that happens around her, which is fair, because she's the only person reasonably reacting to the fact that there is an abomination of science on the loose going around killing people, and also that her boss died and came back in between films.
I love how utterly dismissive everyone is of her, which of course is like a narrative function of making a horror movie. The first person to raise the alarm has to be disbelieved. But it's fabulous to have this incredibly melodramatic performance being met with everyone just saying, shut up, you daft bag.
It's great. There's a bit where she's grieving the loss of Dr. Frankenstein, and she gets told to shut up because she's got she makes an annoying crying noise.
30s were a hell of a time, weren't they?
Yeah.
But it's also going back to Dr. Pretorius. That is the same name, isn't it? That's used in a lot of Lovecraft stuff.
Yes, the Doctor in From Beyond is also Dr. Pretorius, except he's a lot less gay than Dr. Pretorius in Bride of Frankenstein.
How could one be more gay than the one in Bride of
Frankenstein? Did you know that he loves gin? It's his only weakness.
But when he turns up as well, his experiment, he has tiny people in glass tubes.
Yes.
I gave a foul look to the camera when I saw it. It's just like, what? Don't you dare put them in little jars. I know what you do, you sick freak.
I mean, Robyn said that Ernest Thesiger's character in The Old Dark House might be the greatest character in film history. For me, it's Dr. Pretorius.
Might be Dr. Pretorius. He's a contender.
I watched this and I just thought Dr. Pretorius, one of the great film characters or greatest film character, because, The Old Dark House is just an incredibly camp film and everyone in it is sort of camp or polymorphous in some way, but a huge part of the queerness of Bride of Frankenstein is channeled through Dr. Pretorius, and he is the person who takes the subtext that has existed in Frankenstein ever since Mary Shelley set pen to paper of men creating life. And he really ramps it up to 11. The first film famously had that scene where Colin Clive sees his monster move for the first time and screams, "Now I know what it feels like to your god." And that was cut out, even pre-code. That was considered to be way too much. And now you've got Ernest Thesiger as this very sort of waspish, high-toned queen who comes along with his jars full of homunculi and sort of makes all these innuendos about how I don't have the choice of natural means to go forth and multiply, but I have my ways. It's incredible.
Beyond the detail, I'd like to mention that Dr. Pretorius makes the devil. Dr. Pretorius makes a little version of the devil modeled after himself, which is just absolutely wonderful. But I'm going to paraphrase James Swanton, an actor absolutely obsessed with his era of horror, who I did a panel talk with in 2021, in which, because there's no better way of saying this, it's not known if James Whale outright intended Dr. Pretorius to be gay, as silly as that might sound. But Ernest Thesiger definitely did.
Yes.
And he delivers the greatest toast in cinema history to a new world of gods and monsters. So good, and it sadly makes me think of the Dark Universe. Remember the Dark Universe?
Vividly. What summer that was. Yeah, but of course, that also was the title of the very, very good Bill Condon biopic of Whale from the late 90s, starring
Superb
Ian
biopic.
McKellen. Yeah, love that movie. But yes, he's an incredible character, and I just think it feels like the first of what my friend Ollie calls double down sequels. It feels like the first film that's really took the original and thought, right, everything in the original, including all of the bits that pissed people off, we're going to turn to 11. We're going to make everything as excessive as we possibly can. And in the context of 1930s cinema, where, as Robin was saying earlier, it is often very stagey. If you watch particularly a very serious Oscar-winning movie from that era, you often feel like you were watching, National Theatre Live. It is a revelation. It is one of those few early talkies that has the sort of energy and the line of attack of the really great silent movies before sound shackled these things down.
Absolutely. And in regards to doubling down, and indeed in regards to the controversial content that was cut from the first Frankenstein, it triples down on the religious imagery.
Yes.
It's one of the most fascinating parts of it. Obviously, there's direct visual parallels between the monster and Christ, and they don't feel pretentious. You see the suffering, you feel it, you feel the misunderstanding. It's phenomenal. There's definitely religious imagery in what I think is one of the greatest scenes in any film ever, which is a moment which is lifted directly from Mary Shelley's original novel, where the monster, having been rejected by the world, stumbles into the home of a blind man.
Yes, absolutely.
A lonesome blind man who takes him in, does not judge what he looks like because he cannot see him, and then recites a prayer. And it is the most just heart-wrenchingly beautiful scene. The way that he talks, that him mentioning, thank you God for bringing two of your lonely creatures together. Oh my, it hits me every time.
Beautiful, yeah.
You look at that scene, and when it starts, there's a part of you that thinks, can I watch this in the same way now that I've seen it parodied so beautifully in Young Frankenstein, where it is the base for that amazing Gene Hackman cameo? And as you say, you do get swept away with it. I think the fact that the rest of the film is so camp and lurid and frivolous means that shines out as the one bit that reminds you that James Whale knows what it means to be an outsider. For all of the fun of these films, there is a core of real pain in there.
And that's the evergreen nature of Frankenstein, isn't it, really?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not dated in the way that those other Universal monster movies has, because Frankenstein is basically code for anybody who's an outsider.
Yeah,
I mean, there's visual references to lynchings. There's
definitely. I know we're not specifically talking about the first Frankenstein, but I was shocked by the fact that James Whale's first Frankenstein legitimately disturbs me. I think it is a really wonderfully, powerfully harrowing film about the nature of being an outcast and being hunted down for being abnormal. I think it's truly quite upsettingly intense, and it's undeniable. I mean, people talk often about the queerness of Bride of Frankenstein, but there's a far darker queerness to the first Frankenstein, which is kind of people will see you as a monster and people will try and hunt you down. And it legitimately shocked me, which makes Bride of Frankenstein quite interesting because it's a lighter film, but it still affects. It still moves in that way.
Yeah. It's really interesting on that level, though, if it just means so much to so many people, because it's not like what Dracula is. Dracula is just a guy who drinks blood. Is he sexy? Is he campy? Doesn't matter. The Invisible Man...
It's not like The Mummy, where getting into the subtext of it actually makes the movie slightly worse, and you just think, this exists because, like, old British people felt rightly guilty about looting North Africa and the Middle East. But this is...
I mean, I root for The Mummy. I tend to root for the monster, but I root for The Mummy. I'd like to kill those colonial bastards.
The problem with Frankenstein is that I think it's all downhill from here. I mean, as far as adaptations of him, it's vague adaptations. Debatably, the one that Kenneth Branagh did is the most faithful adaptation.
Curse of Frankenstein, I actually really love because I think with Hammer, Peter Cushing makes that. Peter Cushing does a profoundly evil, sinister performance as Dr. Frankenstein. In fact, it's notable that he is the horror icon with Hammer who carried these Frankenstein films. The monster doesn't come back for each of them. It is simply Peter Cushing as this evil bastard who is actually a more novel-accurate version of the character, because it's quite funny that you see a lot of James Whale in the Frankenstein in his film, and you think, oh, he's a sweet guy who's just trying to do all of this, and then you watch Peter Cushing Frankenstein and he's just like, I'm going to impregnate my maid and then kill her when I find out. And I'm just like, okay.
The one, I would agree with Rob that the James Whale, Boris Karloff films are like the high watermark of cinematic Frankenstein adaptations.
Yeah.
The one I will go to bat for that I guess is film adjacent is the stage adaptation by Danny Boyle that came out about 10 years ago, which was broadcast live in theatres and I think is still obtainable on the National Theatre's website and is really fascinating.
I think it's superb. I've
James
seen
James McAvoy and Benedict Cumberbatch watching the role.
Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller.
And regardless of some really dodgy comments that Benedict Cumberbatch made on tour about autistic people, it's a great stage production. I think it's an incredibly accurate stage production to the source text, like as accurate as you can get. It's chilling, beautifully performed stuff. I do think it's a properly superb adaptation. It's probably even though I think Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein from James Whale are the best screen versions, that is the one which I think does the most justice to the source text.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anything we've left unsaid about Bride of Frankenstein, or have we checked it all off, do you think?
There's a couple of things, but Robin, do you want to go first? Yeah.
I just want to mention that it has... I know... The thing is, having recently watched a documentary on Boris Karloff, I know that he wasn't happy with the fact that the creature spoke and said lines in it, which is strange because I think he pulls so much emotion from that.
Yeah.
Every word has weight. He makes every single word matter. And the longest sentence that he has is at the end, and it's an inspired line, and it's famous now for good reason, in which he says, "You go, you live," to Frankenstein, and then turns to Pretorius and say, "No, you stay. We belong dead."
Yes.
And I think that is such a powerful line. So much has been said about it, but it's such it's a raw, wonderful line. It's the kind of thing you'd expect to come out of pre-code film, but no. This is a post-code horror film, and just "we belong dead" carries so much weight.
Yeah, it's that era of actors. Him and Bela Lugosi were incredibly talented actors, and it's just such a shame that cinema history is kind of reduced one to a shuffling monosyllabic thing, and the other one to an accent, because they were both excellent.
Both are superb, even in films which are considered lesser, like Edward's Bride of the Monster. Bela Lugosi is superb.
Yeah.
They're both incredibly talented and wonderful actors who brought so much to their craft.
Just because he was Hungarian and he sounded different, that's all he was. But do take a chance on some of his movies. He's absolutely wonderful.
There's something that kind of brings it full circle for me, which it is sort of led into by what Robyn was saying about the ending. But I mentioned that film noir was like some of the earliest experience I'd had in interpreting a film beyond just, what is the plot, who are the characters. And this has a similar thing. I remember the first time I watched this film, I watched it when I was a teenager with my granddad, and he laughed at the bit where the monster sort of pulls a lever and the entire laboratory just blows up, and he thought it was very funny.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah, he thought it was very funny that Dr. Frankenstein, the scientific genius, has for some reason...
Although we've got the explode the building button.
Which is...
I think they've got one of those in Twitter HQ right now. He's going to push it any day.
It is very funny that he's got that, but it also kind of taught me something. There is such an iconographic power about the idea of pulling a lever that destroys everything, and it taught me not to get too hung up on the plausibility of a film's imagery. I guess you could have had a scene where the monster picked up a can of petrol and splashed it round the laboratory, and then sort of with his massive stupid hands lit a match somehow.
He gets out one of his cigars, because he smokes some massive cigars, right? He just he blows on the tower and then lights the cigar Heather's style on it.
As funny an idea as that is, it isn't better. It isn't better than the absolute punch of you pull a lever, everything blows up. And it did teach me a lot about how films work that isn't necessarily to do with plausibility or airtight logic. It stopped me from having a subscription to CinemaSins, is I guess what I'm saying about this movie.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Oh, also, we haven't even mentioned The Bride. I've just realised we haven't mentioned The Bride.
Wow, how have we not? Because Elsa Lanchester, absolute bicon. And
she slays. She says no lines. She absolutely slays throughout the entirety of it. I was meant to do a script reading recently of the Bride of Frankenstein script, and Tony said, I can't do this because the bride doesn't have any lines. But she's superb. She turns up. She came to life. She slayed. She died 3 minutes later. Rarely does someone do it as good.
Where did the hair come from? Because
I don't know. It's great though.
They've got the body wrapped up. There's no hair. It's then wakes up. Jump cut, that hair.
Answer is, but there's a fade in. There's a fade in, and you see the hair's there because that hair would not fit under there. But I think they stuck it on last minute, like Lego piece.
Around, just had that fantastic haircut laying there.
It's great. It looks wonderful. But I bet there was part way through where what's his name? Was it Jack Pierce who was the man responsible for all of the wonderful Universal monster makeup, just turned up and thought, this is great, I've got this hair planned. What the fuck have you guys done? Why have you wrapped her in bandages like that? I can't put the hair on.
Yeah.
It's funny because my DVD has the original poster on the front, and it's very interesting that although they make a big deal out of Elsa Lanchester, as they should, she has just one of the movie's most unforgettable faces, in my opinion. But the hair is done quite abstractly. The hair is painted in a very elusive way, and it's like they're thinking, no, we don't give this away. We can't have to keep this under wraps because it's such
you said it.
Well, but yeah, no dialogue, and we're still talking about it nearly 90 years later because it's
one of the go-to Halloween outfits.
Yes,
it doesn't just revolve around some normal trope, but slutty. So
I think it's also a wonderful, almost the biggest joke of Bride of Frankenstein is that it's called Bride of Frankenstein and she's in it for a whole 3 minutes. I think that's right at the end.
Well, also, it's one of those things, isn't it, where the Bride of Frankenstein is not Elsa Lanchester, is it? The Bride of Frankenstein is Valerie Hobson as Elizabeth.
It's true. Valerie Hobson, who was not in the first one. It's quite funny watching them back to back. Because suddenly everybody else is the same, apart from the fact that suddenly Frankenstein and Frankenstein's wife is played by a completely different actress. I don't know the context, but...
Well, that's one of the interesting things about the relationship between this and Frankenstein, isn't it? Is this basically the first Evil Dead 2 style sequel where at the start in that drawing room sequence with Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and everyone, they're basically saying, oh yeah, you've told the bit of the story where, Frankenstein makes his monster and the villagers get angry and they burn the place down, and you see clips of all this. And of course, galloping through it allows them to retcon the fact that, as Robyn said, Frankenstein is heavily implied to be dead at the end.
They break his spine. He falls. It hits that windmill.
Yes.
If Batman can get better with a bad back by doing
But this is Colin Clive. Do you think he's Batman? Do you think Colin Clive is Batman? Honestly, quite frankly, not to diss Colin Clive too much, but he's built like a twig. If he fell down the stairs, that'd be it.
That'll do.
And I must also note that Mary Shelley is also played by Elsa Lanchester.
Yeah,
I think that's notable, and that is the only role in the film which Elsa Lanchester is credited for, because, like in the first Frankenstein, they try and keep the monster's identity secret, but obviously the cat was out of the bag somewhat with Boris Karloff. And of course, a good cast is worth repeating. Don't forget, the good cast is worth repeating, because the credits appear both at the start and end of the film, which it's cute. It's cute.
Yeah, generous spirit.
It is indeed. But talking about the man behind the camera himself, James Whale, what are our feelings on him as an icon of cinema and a creator, a filmmaker in his own right?
I mean, I think he's a superb filmmaker. I think he's a real icon of that era of filmmaking. I think he was a bit mean to Boris Karloff and hurt his back, because that happened numerous times on set because they kept arguing on what to do with a scene. So he kept putting in scenes where he had to carry things about. And I also think that he made a film called The Kiss Before the Mirror, which I think was a bit dodgy, which I watched today before the film. However, that being said, James Whale, queer cinema icon. It's great. Yes. Ian McKellen plays him really, really well.
Yeah. Queer cinema icon, horror icon, like pre-code icon, everything he turned his hand to, he was iconic in. And to me, he is one of the directors of that generation who had the most faith in the power of the image. The things that other directors were doing at this time with long dialogue were done by James Whale with one or two shots and like we say, the fact that you can still go to a Halloween party dressed as Frankenstein's monster or dressed as Elsa Lanchester in Bride, and everyone knows what you're referring to, is proof of how good an image maker he was.
It's in an era when the focus was on sound, those images linger. They remain. Even in the old Dark House, was just people talking to each other for most of it. Images like Boris Karloff peering through the door with his scratched up face, they endure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when we were talking about sort of this genre or this era of cinema, one thing that wasn't really mentioned, I think, is really true in this guy, in James Whale, is that we're inventing the language of cinema.
Yeah.
And there's so many things here in an Invisible. I don't think the Invisible Man's as good because there's one thing.
For shame, for shame.
100,000 policemen looking for him, and not a thing. They're all idiots.
How dare you? How dare you slander the movie about the naked man with shoe-shaped feet? He's naked for more of the film than I am comfortable to admit.
But just the visual style of those movies. There's other people as well. I think Fritz Lang, James Whale, Todd Browning. These few names that invented like a language that still persists today. And I don't think they'll ever get enough credit for that, really.
And they invented the language of horror as well. It's fascinating that when you talk to people about Frankenstein, the novel, they will claim to remember, Mary Shelley writing scenes where a lightning bolt hits the castle and, all of the electrical equipment around the monster crackles into life. And none of this is in the book. Mary Shelley very deliberately kept the creation of the monster as vague and suggestive as possible. Whale had to imagine what that would actually look like on screen, and he did it well enough that everyone thinks Shelley wrote it.
Yeah, absolutely, because you look at, on the, I think it was Eureka again, I'm mentioning him a lot today, I'm not on their page.
Great.
Yeah, shout out to Eureka. I am on there, they keep sending me stuff.
But I think it was Arrow. Whoever it was, it doesn't matter. But the release of the Ken Branagh Frankenstein has the very first Frankenstein on it from 1910. It's very, very, very short. And if you put that Frankenstein next to this Frankenstein, you wouldn't think it was the same character.
Yes,
indeed.
How much is on James Whale here, I think, is, again, big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed.
Okay, so I think that wraps it up. Before we talk about where we can find people, some other stuff that's happening about the place. So we have a Patreon, and there's a hell of a lot of stuff going on over there these days.
Sure is.
For myself, you have at the last day of the month, we finally figured out that gem. Calling it last night. When should we release it? Whenever. Last day of the month is when we decided. So there's that. And coming... Oh no, it just should have passed now. The entirety of a Cube miniseries in the spin-off show for this called Not Uncut from the Video Aisle. And yeah, we didn't start off with a good series because the Cube sequels, man. The Cube sequels. They are grim.
I didn't like Circle. I didn't think that was a good Cube sequel.
Oh, no. There's Cube, Hypercube, and Cube Zero. I think Cube Zero, there's about 8 movies on Letterboxd that have given a 5-star rating, and now there's 9 with Cube Zero. I hated it so much.
Oh, that means it's the good stuff.
That's the one with the dude of the Lego eye. And it's but there's also a pop screen, which Graham yourself over there does. I don't know what's on it recently, so...
There's Embrace of the Vampire.
There's been Embrace of the Vampire with Robin Adams. By the time this goes out, we'll have, I think, put out our August Patreon episode, which, I mean, you can only remain aloof from trend so long. We have done Barbie. It's got Dua Lipa in. Its soundtrack is basically 90% of the British top 40 at the time we're recording this. We had to do it, and we had great fun doing it. We've also recently had our 100th episode about Xanadu. We're covering Baz Luhrmann's Elvis next month. It's, a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. And also there's a new it should be out by now, I think. Yeah, a new series for Red Dwarf, episode by episode, called the Saga Continuum, which apparently it's a joke. I don't know enough about Red Dwarf.
I did watch the majority of Red Dwarf, and I can't remember the origins of that.
It's a joke, apparently, but
I think it is. It would make sense, but it is.
But I thought the only joke I remember that's inspired from that is our Ross, which is a good joke. But I also have the Unseen Asia articles. Graham has Doctor Who and X-Files.
Yes, I've been starting a series recently where I go through all of the conspiracy episodes of the X-Files, trying to answer the ultimate question of, does this make sense or not?
Usually not, I imagine.
Yeah, we've all wondered it. But at the moment, I'm like right in the middle of season 2, and oh man, you forget how great this show was when it was really firing on all cylinders. It still looks so good.
Check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, wherever you're listening or watching this. That's a new string to this podcast. But Graham, where can we find yourself on the internet?
Well, on Letterboxd, of course, just search for Graham Williamson. I write for the print edition mostly, but sometimes the online edition of Byline Times. I sometimes have things in We Are Cult, but not as often as I want to, because everyone in We Are Cult knows far more about their field than I do, and I feel genuinely intimidated. And also, of course, I write for thegeekshow.co.uk.
And Robin, where can we find you?
Well, you can find me at The Geek Show. Obviously, I write semi-regularly. There's almost like gaps of a month or so, and then suddenly about 5 reviews from me. But otherwise, you can find me at Real Robin Adams on most socials. You can find me as just Robin Adams on Letterboxd. I post on there. I am mildly popular on there. If you're on the kind of micro-budget British indie horror scene, then you may or may not see my face somewhere or other, or already have seen it. So just keep an eye out there, because I'm sometimes in films. I've also apparently got a little thing as part of Horrified Magazine's Amicus retrospective coming up, if you want to read that. So more writing from me about a certain house that dripped blood.
That's a wild movie. It really is.
It is a wild movie. It's got John Pertwee in it.
It does. But yes, that's it for the first episode of Series 3 of, gotta make sure I say it right, the Uncut Network. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Showboat Uncut.